All right, and for more on this, we're joined via Skype by Right to Know's Dale McKinley. Mr. McKinley, thank you so very much for joining us here on Afro Worldview. Well, as a start, yesterday while speaking to our reporter based in Marikana for those commemorations, I asked the question whether she felt there had been some kind of significant changes for the widows of those who died in the Marikana massacre and their families and those who survived that Marikana massacre. And she says she seemed to see a couple of improvements as, she drove into the area yesterday. On the back of that, we get some of the workers, Londoner workers, saying that not much has changed of their living conditions, not much is happening, and they're still sort of getting pushback from politicians, not really interested in their plight. What is your view in its entirety of what's going on in Marikana right now?
Well, I think it's quite obvious that the government has done the most minimalist kind of development that they promised. I mean, let's go back to before the Marikana massacre and what the demands of the Marikana community were. They were fundamentally for not only housing and basic services, but for other productive, in other words, job opportunities. But leaving those aside, let's just look simply at the infrastructure. If one visits Marikana today, yes, there have been a few little improvements, a couple of things, but in relative terms, over 6 years, we have to say that it's very minimal, that the vast majority of people have not benefited, that in fact people are still living in very squalid conditions, that the basic service situation is not really that good, the housing situation remains fairly much in crisis, and even on the productive opportunity side, in other words, the jobs and work-related side, things have gotten worse because instead of jobs being created, they've been shed. So it's a situation in which I believe that government has not really prioritized the areas of Marikana. They've seen it as sort of something, leaving it up to the mines and their social labor plans and so forth, and those have been inadequate. So I would say that the residents are rightfully disappointed and rightfully somewhat disillusioned at all the promises that were made after the massacre, and with minimalist contributions being made to address those kinds of demands.
I mean, you mentioned the fact that it seems that government has sort of not prioritized the area because it's just seen as, another mining area. But I would wonder, seeing that there's so much attention and the spotlight has been shone on Marikana, one would think that a government would want to do more because a lot of people are, asking questions, and we've heard the families complaining. Why would the government not see this as an opportunity to at least seem as though something is being done, particularly because we are focused on Marikana and what the families are saying about government?
Well, it's a very good question, Flo. And, if you remember in the past, when an area was identified that needed priority development, it was a presidential project. We had several around the country that were, elevated, and particular infrastructural funds were made available, and personnel from different departments. That hasn't happened in Marikana, and one wonders why. It seems as though in the context of mining communities, not just in Marikana, but across our country, that the government has a general attitude of saying to leave it up to the local development, or to the mines themselves, that they have other bigger priorities. But you're right, in the sense of not only just a public relations issue in terms of how government is perceived, but also, if they were to have gone into Marikana and done this and really turned things around, they wouldn't be facing the kinds of questions today that people are asking, not simply about Marikana, but about government's commitment to poor communities in general. That what we see is oftentimes, a very sort of rushed development, and then that's it. And then years go by and there's neglect. And so I think Marikana is sort of a symptom of a much larger problem, which is governments essentially not paying attention to where development is needed the most. We have lots of money being spent on infrastructure, but it's simply not going to those that I think need it the most.
Mr. McKinley, do you think that the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, is caught in a sort of catch-22 situation, sort of damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. There was a time when the Marikana community were not even interested in seeing him because they felt that he was responsible for what had happened. And now, we're sort of getting stories from some of the widows, and we're hearing reports that they are saying they want him to come and speak to them. What do you think President Ramaphosa's position right now is, and how he should actually tackle the Marikana issue?
Well, I think, first of all, he should have been in Marikana. I think any politician who looks at the situation sees the symbolism of this. This is not simply about 34 people being gunned down. It was seen, I think, not only by many South Africans in the world, but of a huge black mark on our democracy, a situation which was almost unthinkable of our own democratic government, killing workers who were demonstrating for whatever purposes they were in terms of salaries and other things. And he needed to show leadership. And I think the problem is, yes, he is in between a rock and a hard place, but he's put himself there because he didn't say much for a long time. He just said, look, I wasn't really involved. I deny the fact that I colluded with lawmen to make sure that the strike was crushed. But he's sort of been very, not directly forthright, I think, about his own role, and that's raised questions. So as president, he needs to take the lead. Let him go to Marikana, let him speak to the people, put them into his confidence, be honest, say we made mistakes, this is what we're going to do. Yeah. That would show leadership. As long as he doesn't do that, people are going to ask questions.
Now, you would have heard the union leader, AMCU President Joseph Mathunjwa, saying that he wants those in any way involved in the Marikana massacre to be hauled before the International Criminal Court. Okay, let's move away from the fact that South Africa has in any case decided they're removing themselves from the Rome Statute. Let's pretend that hadn't happened. Is that a realistic thing? Would that have been a realistic thing? Could they have been hauled to the International Criminal Court? And would that even have been a good call?
Well, I think it would have probably been premature. I think what we first need to do, I understand the call, but our own justice system needs to take care of this. Yeah. And we have a lot of, good law. We have a good justice system. It's a question of how we use it. We can't jump to an international context unless we've exhausted, I think, the national one first. Right. So in that context, it's understandable. I think Joseph Mathunjwa and others are very frustrated at the lack of action. But I think people are saying, well, what should happen now? Well, look, we've got very specific recommendations from the Farlam Commission, from the other panel of experts with regards to the policing and public order policing. Let's implement them. I think once people begin to see that there's action, that somebody's being held responsible, that there are things that are being done, then we have movement forward. The frustration and the anger, and I think the continuation of this Marikana massacre as a sort of national conversation in this regard is as a result of the feeling that people got away with it, and that nobody has really paid any price for that. And we need to take it seriously as a nation, as opposed to then jumping to the international without dealing with it ourselves.
It's been a great pleasure speaking to you, Dale McKinley. Thank you so very much for your time, your great articulation on the matter. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. That's Dale McKinley, a Marikana activist, joining us there via Skype. And, of course, those commemorations 6 years on after the Marikana massacre that happened in August 2012 took place yesterday. Those are some visuals there from yesterday's events.